Hello, Madeleine here, and I could not be more excited to talk about hot docs. This week, I will be covering the Hot Docs International Documentary Festival, and it brings me so much joy to get to share my reviews on the films and talk a little bit about this festival with people who might not be familiar with it, who are totally familiar with it, and who have never really considered going, but now is your chance. So, let's get into it. But before we do, I'd like to give a really big thank you to Comic Boys for giving me the opportunity to go cover this and to have a media pass. It's really exciting to have the access to the festival that I have right now. I am so honored to be in the same room with so many of the filmmakers that I've got to hear from through Q&As. I'm excited to do some interviews later this week. I'm very honored. I'm very grateful. And I want to let everyone know that if you are not going to the Hot Docs Fest and you live in Toronto this year, go. Change your mind. Cancel your plans. Go to the Hot Docs. Okay, now that I have shamelessly plugged Hot Docs, because why wouldn't I want to talk about how this is kind of going to work. So I'm a little bit late with my day one reviews. I'm sorry about that. It's been really busy. And I want to make sure I'm doing a good job here, so it might take me a day or so to get my reviews out after I see these films, but I'm going to try to put them out as quickly as possible so that if you're listening to this and you want to know what to check out at the festival, that I can give my recommendations out. And I can only see so many films in a day, but I am going to do my best to tell you what I think you should go see. So I'll start with Agent of Happiness. This was an incredible doc to begin Hot Docs 2024 with. It was co-directed by Arun Batari and Dorotia Zerbo. I'm really sorry if I didn't pronounce those names correctly, but I tried my best. And the doc takes place in Bhutan and follows a man named Amber, whose job is to survey people all over the country to help calculate Bhutan's gross national happiness. I think the idea of quantifying happiness in this way is really interesting, and it lends itself really well to maybe the contrastingly nuanced discussions of happiness that are had through this film. We follow Amber and his coworker as they move through the countryside and the city and listen to the stories of people from all different walks of life who have different relationships with happiness and might experience different levels of happiness. Throughout this process, we also learn more about Amber and his own personal quest for happiness, which is centered around his desire to have a wife and start a family. From the beginning, I was really taken with how beautiful this film is. It's such a visual treat. It's a visual delicacy. Every shot could be paused and used for a postcard for Bhutan, and I would want to go. It's a very beautiful film. What's also interesting about it is that it actually felt a lot more like a narrative film than the kind of documentary that a lot of us are used to. It was really funny at times, it was really tender and heart-wrenching at times, which made for a really good watch. It was very watchable, it was very emotional, and I would totally recommend it. Again, it was a really fun start to Hot Docs. We found out in the Q&A how Amber and the directors met, which was a really cool story. So when the filmmakers, they've worked together before on another film that was also set in Bhutan. While they were recording that, they were actually approached by Amber to take part in the Gross National Happiness Survey. And they were really taken with Amber's personality. He's got a great sense of humor, and he was a really good listener. He really was invested in what they had to say about their happiness. And so they decided to keep in touch with him, and eventually they reached out to him to make this film. And they spent 6 years making this film. They got to know Amber really well, and it totally shows in the final project, because you couldn't have a film as vulnerable and sweet and nuanced as Agent of Happiness if you didn't have a subject who really trusted the filmmakers. So kudos to them for creating that relationship and having such a beautiful, respectful portrayal of this character and all the other characters. The side characters in this film in this documentary, were so vibrant. You really grow emotionally attached to all of them. Fantastic. And I'd also like to say, before I move on to the next film, something that was interesting about this film was how it handled the kind of political backdrop that impacts a lot of what's happening. So this documentary features the aftermath of Bhutan's ethnic cleansing of ethnic Nepalis. Midway through the documentary, we find out that when Amber was 2, he lost his Bhutanese citizenship for being Nepali. While we hear how this has impacted Amber economically and emotionally, we aren't given much background on Bhutan's history or any of its political situation. We get a little glimpse, but it's never very explicitly laid out. And at the Q&A session, a man who had worked in Bhutan years ago asked why this context was left out and not explained very clearly. I wouldn't say left out, why it wasn't explained very explicitly. And the filmmaker said that he wanted the film to focus on human stories and be relatable across borders. And I think that the film did that. It was very relatable, lots of moments, regardless of where you live. And that is something I wanted to talk about, just because if you haven't heard of the conflict between Bhutan and the Nepali people, which I actually hadn't heard of Bhutan at all before I'd seen this film. I'm glad that Hot Docs gave me the chance to learn about it, but I hadn't heard about it before. I think that you should do a little bit of preliminary research if that's something you're really, really interested in knowing before you see the film, because they don't lay it out very clearly. So not really a criticism, so to speak, as much as a note for anyone who might want to go see it, because I do think that the film still managed to tell a powerful story and be universal and be relatable without giving that explicit context. But they definitely do talk about politics throughout the film. It's just not made clear enough that if you want to really know what's happening, you could go in with no other background. I hope that makes sense. And I just want to reiterate how great Agent of Happiness was. Really fun to watch. Would totally recommend it. Next, I want to speak about Union. Union was co-directed by Stephen Mang and Brett Story, who was actually a professor of mine at U of T and taught a really incredible course on the relationship between prison abolition and the prison apparatus and cinema, with a huge focus on documentary. So needless to say, after taking that class and loving it and thinking about it all the time, because it's been very relevant to a lot of political issues that I've been interested in since then, I was so excited to see this film. I was so excited to say hi to Brett again, and my expectations were met and exceeded. Union is a cinema verite style documentary that gives us a really close and personal look into the formation of the US's first ever Amazon labor union. And it gives us a really great look into how much passion and dedication it takes for a grassroots worker-led union like the ALU to form at a corporation that is this huge giant and is very famously union adverse and puts a lot of effort and funding into preventing the formation of unions, and also famously treats their workers like garbage. So it's a huge feat, and this film really gives a close and personal look at how it came to be. Before presenting Union, Brett Story gave a really, really impactful speech where she spoke about why documentaries are important and what drives her as a filmmaker to continue to create. And she very eloquently, I am paraphrasing here, she said this beautifully, said that one of the reasons that she loves being a filmmaker is because it gives her an excuse to be in proximity to the incredible people who engage in activism and stand up for their causes, just like Chris Smalls, who is the president of the Amazon Labor Union. And I just wanted to bring this up because, again, I think it speaks to the importance of film festivals, because it gives the audience opportunities to be in proximity to some really amazing people. So go to Hot Docs and take the chance to see these people in real life and to hear them speak, because there are so many really fantastic stories being told at this festival. Sorry if I am being annoying by talking about it so much, but I really, really want people to hear this podcast and go see Hot Docs, because it is so worth it. But yeah, Union really tells a David versus Goliath story, because the ALU is, in Chris Small's words, as grassroots as it gets. It was formed by the Amazon workers, for the Amazon workers, and they had to overcome so many obstacles to unite and have a say against this big corporation that does not care what happens to its workers. And to put into perspective what they were up against, don't quote me on this as an exact number, they raised around $125,000 to create a union again against a giant. Meanwhile, Amazon in the same year spent $14 million on anti-union consultation. So that is just a huge monumental achievement. It's really, really impactful to see it play out on film, and to see it happen in this cinema verite style. When Chris Miles got up on stage, he was asked how it felt to be watched and filmed through the process of organizing this labor union, and he explained that he knew that his story would be told one day, and he wanted people to see how much work and dedication went into the formation of this union and what they were up against. And I think that this answer and this film speak to the trust and respect that the filmmakers and union workers had for each other. So much respect went into the creation of this film, and you can totally see that when you watch it. I'd 100% recommend it. Great job, Professor. Professor Story, you were awesome. I'd love it even if you weren't my professor, but it was really, really cool, and I was super proud to have ever been one of her students. So yeah, Union was amazing. It's gotten a lot of buzz in the festival. Lots of people are talking about it, and I would totally recommend that you go check it out. Now I want to talk about Cyborg Generation, which, as you might be able to tell from the title, is totally different than the other films that I've spoken about. Not that they are very similar, but this one is just so out of left field in the best way possible, and it was a really fun way to wrap up my first day at Hot Docs. So Cyborg Generation was directed by Miguel Murillo Vega and follows Kai, a young man who is inspired by his love of outer space and his burgeoning friendship with some of the world's first cyborg artists, to become a cyborg himself and to have an illegal surgery where he implants technology into his head that will give him the kind of cyborg ability to hear sounds coming from outer space. I'll let that sink in for a minute, because wow, right? I read that kind of blurb that Hot Docs put out about it, and I was like, I need to see this film, and I'm really glad that I did. Stylistically, this felt like watching a sci-fi film. It had beautiful, bold colors, striking compositions. The soundtrack was literally out of this world, and I mean literally, because it was composed by someone who can hear sounds from outer space and makes music out of that. So, whoa. And on top of that, it was shot on film, which is really impressive for a documentary, and really impressive for a documentary that looks like this. It looks incredible. You could go and watch this with the sound off and you'd still have an amazing time, but keep it on because there's actually a really, really beautiful story in this spectacular, shocking seeming plot synopsis that I've just laid out. I don't want to diminish the story or make it sound like it's some kind of joke, because there's a really sensitively told and beautifully human story that is this documentary. So one thing that I want to address while I'm still kind of talking about the style here is that during the Q&A, the director explained that he was a little bit worried that people wouldn't believe that they're watching a documentary because of how stylized it is, and because of how amazing it looks, and because of how kind of outside people's expectations the subject matter and the story are. And I actually think that this uncertainty is doing the documentary a favor. I think that its philosophical power comes from the questions that it brings up through this marriage between a reality subverting topic and a reality subverting form. So it makes you ask, how can there be these extra human realities? Why might someone want to escape reality and find solace in another that's totally different from what most people could even conceive? Again, this film was a mind bender, and it's in the best way. I want to bring up something that really, really struck me earlier in this film, which was that one of Kai's cyborg friends makes a comment about how being a cyborg allows you to choose your oddities. And that line really put a lot of this documentary into perspective for me because I was expecting this to be funny and kind of a spectacle. Not to say that it wasn't spectacular, because again, you need to see these visuals. But it was actually a sensitive film that dealt with a lot of topics, and a big one is how do you find a way to come into yourself and feel like you belong if society has cast you aside and told you that you don't belong and told you that there's things about you that are weird. I think that being a cyborg or engaging with this culture kind of gives people an opportunity to reclaim some of their interests that people might cast them aside for, or kind of reclaim their space in a society that might cast them aside. So I don't want to go too much more into it than that because I'm worried that I've confused you already. Don't be scared by how convoluted my description of this was. I'm trying my best because it's such an interesting topic. It's so far out there, but at the end of the day, this is a documentary that touches on identity, religious trauma, family relationships, ambition, what it means to be human. And if that does not sell you on it, I don't know what will. So overall, it was such a strong first day at Hot Docs for me. I really enjoyed all three of these documentaries. It just filled me with excitement for the rest of the festival, and it's the end of day 2 now that I'm filming this, full disclosure. And I saw 3 more really incredible and really inspiring documentaries today that I will be speaking about soon. But I was so riled up after this day of films. They all just really got to me, and I was kind of too emotional to speak about them yet. I need to gather myself a little bit. There's so much going on here that's really powerful. There's so many films that people need to see, and I'm really happy that so many people are getting to share their voices through this festival. So with that, thank you everybody for listening. I really hope that I might have piqued your interest in one of these documentaries. I hope that you are looking forward to the reviews that I have to come, and please follow Comic Boys on Instagram and check out our stories because I'm going to be updating you guys as I go through Hot Docs as best as I can, and showing you what's going on down on the ground at Hot Docs. So check that out, and thank you very much for listening. I'm so excited to see you soon and review more films. Bye.